I let out all the big secrets.
I'm not opening them. Like there was another one that was like.
Well, I was
some
like, why would you want me to
statement or
just
something.
email you back?
Well, I opened it because I
About
was just
2 weeks
pushing
ago, and they just kept on that
up
path.
through
Oh, here
them,
they go.
and it came across. I was like, dude, that's like the third or fourth one.
Good evening and welcome to the City Council Study Session, Tuesday, December 20th, 2022. We have one item on the agenda, update from Raftellus regarding the cost of services study for utility connection fees and rates. Roll drums.
All right.
You guys.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We're starting our work here on the cost of service study. This is all in preparation because we know that fund is also going to need a little bit of an increase. He's really doing the lion's share of this work along with Raftellus, and so I'll turn it over to Nathan. January, February for a follow. We're hoping for maybe a June vote, maybe taking a vote in June.
Well, thank you very much. So, financial plan, they're going to kind of are the rates we change the rate alternatives you guys want to see. Again, yeah. And let
Great, thank you, Nathan. Mayor, members of council, my name is Todd Cristiano, and Toby Federer is with me as well. And like Chris said, kind of where we are today on the study. I'll give you a little more background on that, on what it is we were asked to do for the city. And let's see if this is going to work for me. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, how's that look for everyone? Can you see that title screen there?
Right. Got it.
Okay, great. We were retained by the city to complete a water and wastewater financial plan, cost of service, and rate design study. And this is kind of a continuation of the studies we had done last year. We had completed a water and wastewater connection fee study for you, as well as a financial plan, a high-level financial plan associated with the impacts as a result of changing connection fees and that sort of thing. This study coming around here now is we're taking a deep dive into the financial plan and looking at alternatives of financing different projects, different growth option projects as well. And we're looking at the cost of service and rate design. But at the outset of this, whenever we start a study like this, we need to kind of figure out what are we trying to do. And we know that City of Norman's rates and fees have to do a lot of things. They have to fund the operations, they have to fund capital projects, they have to maintain reserves and fund growth and ensure that cost recovery from the customer classes. And really, we're going to do that by looking at our financial plan, which tells us the amount of money we need, our cost of service, design, and connection fees. So on the right-hand side, that's really where we're focusing our time on this study, is going through all these items here, with the exception of connection fees, since they were adopted back earlier this year. So the rate study process, and what we're going through today, and the rest of the study, have three components: the financial plan, which tells us how much revenue, how much money do we need each year to maintain our financial health. The cost of services, is everyone paying their fair share? And if you think about it, the utility on the water side has two customer classes, residential and commercial, and the university as well, OU, but residential and commercial. And the idea for the cost of service to ensure that each one of those customer classes are paying their proportionate share of cost based on how they use the system. That could be step 2 in our process, and we've not gotten there yet, but that's going to be step 2 after our financial plan. And what we're asked is rate design. How can we ensure that the rates we're charging are fair to the community? And there's a couple of things we can do to look at that to make sure that we design rates in a thoughtful manner that meet the city's objectives, but also the community objectives. So tonight, we're really focusing on step one, financial plan. And we're gonna show water and wastewater. So real quickly, when we develop a financial plan, there's a lot of steps and there's just a lot of data that we go through, and Nathan and Chris have been great about providing that data to us. We have to look at all your revenue sources, your rate revenues, your miscellaneous revenues, your connection fee revenues, our bonds or bonds that we might be issuing over the study period to help smooth out revenue adjustments. We fold in our operating expenses on an annual basis and any changes that are going to occur over the next 10 years. Obviously, we have a capital improvement program, which is fairly robust for the city, and we have our debt service, both the existing payments on debt service and proposed payments on debt service for those future loan projects. We all have to balance that with minimizing revenue adjustments, but also meeting some certain financial metrics that are required by your bond covenants. And one of those is reserve levels. And that's just simply maintaining a minimum amount of money in your bank account, just like your personal savings. You might not want to go below $100 in your bank account or something. There's a minimum amount of revenue, or funds you want to keep in the bank account. And with the state loans, there's a requirement on that. There's also coverage ratios of debt service coverage, and that's simply a fancy way of saying that when you look for a house and you look to your debt to income ratio as being one of the critical financial metrics, it's the same thing, but it's just the inverse of that. It's the revenue divided by your debt. So basically the same thing. It really tells you the financial health of the utility. So we have to balance all of those things: the timing of the projects, how we're going to fund it, the revenues, and how do we minimize revenue adjustments, and how do we maintain our reserve and coverage ratios over the study period. And that's kind of the balancing act we have to play when doing that. And so when we go through these scenarios, you'll see, and we'll point out certain things that might seem counterintuitive as we go through the scenarios. So Toby, I'll let you take over for the wastewater utility, and I'll go through the slides as you're talking.
Sure, thank you, Todd. So my name is Toby Fetter. Todd, thanks for the introduction earlier, but as Todd said, I'm just going to step right into the wastewater utility. Starting with the metrics, which was the last thing that Todd discussed, really, from the standpoint of existing policies, we have an operating reserves of basically 8% of O&M, is basically 30 days worth of revenue, and that's what we want to have set aside. We have a capital reserve that's basically 1 year depreciation expense. I believe the actual policy within the city or for Northern Utilities, it's the average of 5 years of capital, but 1 year depreciation expense, since that number will bounce around so much, is an equivalent metric. And then the debt service coverage ratio, which is the bond covenants that Todd was referring to, you have 1.25 times debt service, and as he was alluding, your net revenue in comparison to what you have for debt service each year needs to be basically 125% of the debt service. But Northern Utilities has had at least verbally stated desire to stay at least 1.4 or above, and that's a level that I would say is certainly not at the low end of folks, but it's not at the higher end of what you see for a lot of municipal utilities. Within the financial planning scenarios, we've taken a look at a couple of variables. The first one being the growth in accounts. Obviously, Northern Utilities has a significant amount of its revenue generated off of service fees, which are fixed, and they're tied to the actual account connection to the system. And then one of the other major revenue producers is associated with basically the average winter consumption volume. And that's in order to account for the fact that there is irrigation that goes along those lines, which could potentially skew how much revenue you're going to generate if you were billing everyone for water use in the summer as sewer use. And so this is the way that Northern Utilities decided to do it. On the capital funding, as I'm sure everyone who is hearing my voice is familiar, Northern Utilities has traditionally planned to cash finance pretty much all capital projects. We're going to talk a little bit about what the impact of that looks like on the sewer utility in Norman, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why it might be really smart for you to consider bond financing, at least in the near term, not as a long-term policy, but really as a management strategy to level out some of the near-term bumps we have.
Oops, sorry, Toby.
No problem. And then, just as as sort of a cautionary statement, the stereos we're going to be looking at today, they're in process. What we're going to be looking at is working product. And the results that we present today, they're subject to change, and they're certainly subject to revision based upon feedback from both you folks as well as Norman Utility. And so we'll be all ears when we get to the discussion portion of the conversation. So. Okay, so just from the standpoint of snapshot, where does the sewer utility stand right now? The annual revenues that your existing rate structures produce are slightly lower than your annual operation and maintenance budget, capital and debt expenses. That's 23. Now, the big variable there, just to discuss each of those individually, operation and maintenance obviously is the actual cost associated with running the utility. Somewhat variable, tends to grow over time with inflation, salaries being a major component of the cost there. The capital is going to be the one that's most variable because the cash finance system, as Norman has traditionally been for everything but the largest of projects. Obviously, if you're going to cash finance a project, it's kind of like to Todd's point about the checkbook. If you decide I want to go buy, a new car and I'm going to pay for it in cash, that can be a very large outflow of cash in an individual year, which is fine if you have the reserves to cover that. But in the case where you might need the car but not have reserves available, taking on debt can be a management strategy, so to speak. And then the final one is the debt expenses. And what that is, to put it plainly, it's like the mortgage on your house, to put it into layman's terms. It is the repayment of debts that have been taken on in the past to build prior capital. So that's a set payment schedule that doesn't escalate with inflation. You have a repayment set of interest and principal payments that we know exactly what they'll be for every year until they're completely repaid. And so those are built into our overall financial plan as well. Near term, as I said, one of the challenges we're going to be taking a look at and talking about is going to be whether or not it makes a lot of sense to continue funding near-term capital with just flat-out rate revenues, which is cash financing, that's writing the check out of your checkbook, or whether there might be some other options that allow for a more gradual and stable rate environment, you might say, for the utility customers. And then longer term, one of the reasons that might make sense is when we get to the chart showing you where the expenses look for Norman, what you're going to notice, what obviously can't be missed, you'll see how stark it is you have basically the debt that's associated with your sewer utility is going to be maturing over the course of the next 4 to 5, 6 years, almost entirely. And that does free up some degree of financial capacity for Norman to do things in the future, including future cash finance capital. So with that, Todd, you wouldn't mind advancing?
Trying to here, Lenny. Seems like it's, there we go.
Okay, and so just to refocus on what the right now cash finance expenses are looking like for Norman. This is what's in the plan right now. Next year you have $4.1 million in capital that currently we're, when we came in the door, we were talking about financing on a cash basis. And the same for all of these payments. None of these are based on taking out future debt in order to pay for these. And that can create us a problem. But all in, it's about $26 million that you're going to be looking at over the course of the next 9 fiscal cycles. And it's important to understand that and understand what the impact will be. Okay, so as we in the top chart that's going to populate as we speak, basically, we're going to be projecting stacking bars so that you can see the overall amount. At the bottom in the dark green is the total O&M expenses. As you can see, that escalates over time, and that's associated with the expenses, whether it be salaries or electricity or the price of chemicals. All of the things that go into running a utility tend to go up in cost over time, and we account for that in the financial plan. Laid onto that in the peach color is the debt service. And as I said, what you'll notice there is while it remains fairly constant over the next 4 or so fiscal cycles, it really starts to drop off in fiscal 28 and drops for the next 3 years down to a much smaller number that's a little bit tough to see now that we've stacked on the cash finance CIP. Now, the cash finance CIP is, as you can see, in the near term going to boost us pretty high up in cost, up to, from today's this year, fiscal 23, the area where we are in capital and O&M and debt service. And when I say capital, I mean capital that's not already funded by existing cash. It's going to boost us up above levels that are probably sustainable. And to that, Todd, could you go ahead and give us the line that shows us where existing revenues are? And so the red dotted line there provides a point of comparison against the stack chart. They're both on the same scale, as I think is intuitively known. But what you can see is that when you combine the total O&M and the total debt service, we're pretty close to where we need to be on revenues. Not quite there. We're still underfunding a little bit, but the real challenge over the course of the next 4 to 5 fiscal cycles is going to be managing the expected capital costs. And right now, in the projection, the costs are expected to be entirely cash financed. And especially in light of the very substantial drop off in debt service that you have, this is what we would generally think of as it could be a really good opportunity to actually do some debt financing to even out the long-term bumps. Now, that might not be the case if Norman had a very significant reserve sitting on the sidelines right now. If you have 10 million in reserves, certainly going ahead with that cash financing might be an appropriate strategy. But that's not really the case that Norman, or the situation that Norman is in on the wastewater utility. And so on the bottom chart, you can see in the left-hand stack chart, you can see your current reserves, which are a little under $1.8 million on the north side of the zero line, which is about 2/3 of the way up. And then what you can see is what happens to your expected fund balance at the end of each fiscal cycle were you to end up paying for all of the capital on a cash basis. And as you can see, you go pretty steeply into the red, and you stay there over the course of the projection. And that's going to be something that does not comply with existing policies, and as such becomes something that we can then take a look at making a policy change or taking a look at rates in order to remedy. And so what Tom just pulled up there, the reserve target, is basically where under Norman's adopted reserve policies, what we would hope and expect those reserve balances to end up totaling pretty much over the course of the projection. And as you can see, we end up with reserves that are substantially below where they will need to be for the foreseeable future if you go ahead or if Norman decides to proceed with cash financing. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure exactly how you would manage the cash deficit. So we decided that taking a look at another alternative might be the appropriate approach. So what you'll notice in these charts, these are basically the exact same 2 charts with a different financing structure for the debt that we expect to, or were you to pay for the next 5 years of capital that's in the current plan cash finance by issuing new debt. And then in addition to that, what you'll notice in the top chart, the dashed red line is your expected operating revenues were you to increase both the fixed charges, your service charges that is, as well as your volumetric charges by 10% with your existing user base and the growth assumptions that we've built in. They're fairly reasonable growth assumptions as well. We're not expecting massive growth. But in essence, what this really shows is that if you decide to debt finance some of your capital and you increase rates by 10%, that you probably will be in a pretty good situation with your wastewater utility for almost the next full decade. Now that said, we do carry some CIP items out into the out years, but the highly developed CIP I think is really applicable for the next 5 years. But certainly you'll be in a better position with this strategy 5 years from now if anything new did pop up and needed to be addressed at that time. And so to reiterate, what this projection shows you is that by switching over to a debt financing strategy for the next 5 years of capital, before switching back to a cash finance, which is the yellow bars on top.
Todd, let me interrupt you for a second.
I'm sorry?
Toby, just a
Got
second.
a question.
We have a question from our council member.
Okay, certainly.
I'm kind of green on all this stuff, so can you explain to me what CIP is and what you're talking
Sure.
about when you say we could see issues of that going into 10 years?
Yeah, so a CIP is a capital improvement program, and it's basically the list of things that every utility knows needs to be done. And in the near term, almost all utilities know what they're going to be spending significant amounts of capital funding on, meaning, basically investment in the system in the next 2 to 3 years with a good idea on 5 years. Beyond 5 years, it becomes somewhat more sketchy. And so in the placeholder that you can see, and that's really what you're seeing in the out years, where we are continuing to basically match revenues against the overall combined expenses. But in essence, the CIP is effectively how this wastewater utility wants to invest money in its system going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Let me give an example. Yeah, we're getting ready to replace the centrifuge at the wastewater plant. That spins the water out of the sludge, so then we go put it on the fields. That spinning wears out bearings. That whole machine is worn out, and so we need to get a new one. And what do we estimate cost on that project?
5 to 6 million.
Wow.
So these things happen at these big plants. They were all new because we just built new plants. But as things break, we have to plan to replace those, or we're in a pinch. So that's what those capital improvement projects are.
Okay.
And just one more follow-up real quick. Wastewater is just a little bit different than water. Wastewater, we have the Water Reclamation Fund, we have the Excise Tax Fund, which handles the growth, and then we also have the Sewer Maintenance Fund. So all that pipe replacement that we have to do in town, we do that under the Sewer Maintenance Fund. So this one is really more looking at assets at the wastewater facility.
And you can see, we're really close. Like, once our loans are paid off in 2028, 29, we will then have money. But we have needs right now to fix some things. So we don't, in our rates, Nathan graphed our rates, or their income coming in for wastewater. Since 2015 to 2022, it actually declined slightly because of all these good fixtures and everybody's using better water savings devices. So you're sending less down the sewer. And so when we set those rates in the winter year, December, January, February, that's when you're establishing how much water pays for your sewer bill. Those are getting lower. So we're seeing less money come in the door. And we have more needs. And we're seeing our expenses go up 2% a year. So that's why we're close. We can almost get by, but we need a bump on the wastewater.
Councilmember Holman?
And just for clarification, Chris, the last wastewater rate increase was like November 13,
Yes.
so it'll be 10 years next November.
Yes.
Councilmember?
Do you know, I don't know how bonds work exactly, like, do you know how much is left on that debt that we owe now? And how much is that, like, going out
To
each
pay it
year?
out.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if you did a new bond, could you use it and get rid of that one? Or do you have to make payments on both?
You can do either,
Oh, there you are.
but
I didn't see you a while ago.
our utility debt tends to be state water revolving fund loans. Those are usually not refunded paying off one with another is what's called refunded. And it's not that we couldn't do it, it would be unusual. To take out that-
And I don't know, I just didn't know if maybe that's beneficial to get it down. If you did like a big bond, this we need it. And I've told you since the beginning that if it's right, I'll go push for everything and try to get everybody on board for something like that. And then if you do it by bond, then I know they need rate increases too, but I'm just trying to get something. We gotta have to do something somewhere or another.
Yeah, the important thing to understand is that you can't do one without the other. Whether it's revolving fund or a straight revenue bond, these are utility bonds backed by the revenues of the utility. So you have to have the revenue structure in place to pay the debt service.
Can't get a loan unless we show that we have the money to pay it back.
Okay.
So we have to get the increase first from the voters before we can
You have to
get
demonstrate to
the.
the investors in the bonds that you're gonna repay the debt.
Okay.
He said 10% though.
And okay, another question for you. Are the funds coming out of the sinking fund? Is it gonna be ad valorem tax increases? How
No,
exactly
these
we
are
collecting
not
it?
general obligation bonds backed by.
Good. So the revenue bonds,
These
which
are
means
revenue bonds
we
backed
get
by-
them from the payments as they pay into their bills.
Yes. Utilities, wastewater utility, water utilities, they stand on their own. There are no general obligation bonds.
I wanted to clarify for the folks that are watching that it's not going to affect their property taxes or sinking fund taxes, but revenue bonds are paid back by
By the
revenue we
revenues.
collect from the fees we're collecting.
The user fees, that's right.
That's it, that's the
Those who
word.
use it,
User fees.
they pay for it.
Thank you.
Sometimes
Okay.
And I would add,
2%
just
of the base fee,
importantly,
10%
one
of the
other thing that this allows you to do, by using this approach, is it allows you to build your reserves to the appropriate level in line with Norman policy. And that's actually, from the standpoint of being prepared and able to actually handle things that you don't know are coming for you. That's actually a very important thing. Right now, as we talked about earlier, we're a little bit underfunded in that way, and getting up to the sort of targeted level, I think, is an appropriate goal.
Toby, can I interrupt and just kind of state that what 10% reflects?
Yeah,
That's about $1.50 on the base charge per month. And we're figuring at about 30 cents on the rate per 1,000 gallons.
10% is actually 50 cents on the base charge.
50 cents on the base?
Right, and it goes from $5.50 on the service charge, and then the rates go up by 30 some odd cents.
Okay. So it's not a big number, but it is per month. So it'd be times 12. That's what it would actually be
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
per year. So 10% sounds bigger, but wastewater is it's one of our cheaper bills.
Right.
Trash is
That's
$17 bucks usually, and the water is always up around 30, 25 to 30 for most folks, 30 bucks. Yeah.
Councilmember Holman?
One more question.
And two, we've talked a lot about water rate need, or you're not asking for a wastewater rate increase right now?
We're saying yes, we need a
They're saying we
wastewater.
do.
I knew we needed a water. I
Right.
was hoping I could sneak by on wastewater.
Okay.
It looks like we need a slight bump to get through these next few years on wastewater as well.
Yeah, and just to be very specific, if you decide that, and this is obviously a policy question, if Norman decides that you want to maintain your cash financing of your capital program, that's entirely up to you, but the rate change that would be needed is, I think somewhere in the tune of about a third, meaning a 33% increase in order to get from the 14 and change $1 million that you raise in revenues from rates right now up to the $19 million hurdle, which is next year's operations cost, debt service cost, and cash finance capital costs in aggregate. The total is actually going to be about $19 million. Obviously, that represents a very substantially greater rate increase than what we're talking about by modifying how we finance the capital programs that are needed.
But because of this retirement of debt, is it, if I understand correctly, that if we had a utility rate increase, that it could be
Todd, can
Could
you
be
go
the
back
last. It
a
could be the
slide or
last
two?
one we would need for a long time, perhaps.
Yeah, let me go back one more draft. That one right there. So what they're talking about is we could raise the rates high enough to get over this peak,
Yeah.
but then now you're too high going across. So what you do is you take a loan for this expenditure, $8-10 million bucks. You'll have a lower payment, so now you just bump it up a little bit and that'll cover that payment.
It's a small
But the payment
increase.
will be a 20-year payment. But see, that's how we're gonna do a smaller increase for wastewater to get through those next few humps.
And it
That's
would probably
what
be
he's suggesting.
quite a while before another one would be needed, perhaps.
Yes, and then we'll have debt, we'll have some
And
loans
that would
that we
free up.
had that go away in 28, 29. We're paying 2-point-something million on those loans per year. So now we have $2 more million a year that we can now start using on capital projects again, that we don't have to pay that loan payment.
This is a 10-year picture that they're.
Right.
they're taking.
Okay.
So wastewater's close. We just gotta get through the next 5 years.
Okay, before we get into water utility, I just want to reiterate this and make sure I have a full understanding of what we're saying. Based off of this, we have to get a 10% increase of wastewater user fees before we would be able to get a bond to do whatever we need to do. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
And the 10%
Or
increase.
not do what you need to do.
Or don't fix
Right.
these things, which makes, we're gonna fall on our swords here. I mean,
Right.
if things start breaking at the plant, we're gonna be in trouble.
So the 10% increase, are we asking the citizens to pay that? Who will be
Yeah, that
paying
would
that?
be
Sewer
rate,
ratepayers.
the sewer.
All ratepayers.
So nothing with developers or anything like that, it's
No.
all just end user.
And if you guys remember, the connection fees on wastewater, sewer, we had Ref tell us look at those, and we are very big. Our sewer connection fees are the biggest. Remember how everyone says we're the biggest in the state? And when they looked at it, they said, yeah, you don't need to raise those anymore. They're big enough.
And when they looked at it, it wasn't just because they compared us to other cities. They looked at it and said, we legally can't justify you charging any more.
Right.
Based on your proposed capital needs for growth.
And what does it cost us to debt finance? What does it cost us to?
It's market-based. Right now it'd be 3.5%. 4.
And some of those older loans were 2%, so it's gone up, but they're still decent. SRF gives us really good rates.
We would love to cash fund, I think, as much as we can. It just, that impacts the rates more. So this is a way to help us get
Right.
by.
And so,
And Todd, if you would go forward one slide.
yeah, go
please.
forward one more, because how, explain to us, how will this get us ahead and not just put us back in the same place 10 years from now?
Well, number one, if you notice the chart, you'll have a fully funded reserve balance 10 years from now with this plan. And indeed, we don't switch over to fully debt financing. You still have a fair amount of debt that goes away. You replace it partially, but as you can see by the yellow bars there at the top, you're continuing on an annual basis to cash finance things.
Yes.
So you'll be, if, for example, in fiscal 32, if this were to play out exactly as shown, if you decided, we're going to take a year off of cash financing capital programs, you would generate excess revenues to the tune of a couple $2 million. The issue is you're going to be reinvesting that money on a year in and year out basis, and the way a big opportunity that you have with the expiring debt or maturing debt that you have over the course of the next 5 years is just to replace that debt service that you currently have with new debt service to prevent the spike in your cash finance capital.
So in 28, we pay off the current loan. So that's that bigger pink bar there.
That's correct. It really, I think 29 is your last, is 28 is your last major year payment, yes.
And then 29 would be when you can kind of see that's that new debt that we would have to
That's
fund
the new
like,
debt,
the next
exactly.
5 years of capital projects.
Okay,
And
and then my
what-
last question on wastewater is, were the wastewater impact fees estimated with average cost, or was it with the buy-in method?
Remember, the wastewater connection fee, for lack of a better term,
Right.
is driven by the wastewater excise tax. So it wasn't driven by any individual project. It was a tax. It was driven by just how much are we going to tax for connection to the wastewater system.
Was it though like an average cost or was it?
$850 for a 1,200 square foot house, plus $2 a square foot above 1,200 square feet. It's very arbitrary. It's a tax. That's what
Okay.
it is.
We actually kind of looked at it both ways. We looked at it as, buying into the existing plant, and then we also said, well, what if we did have to build the north facility, which is what our current plan is, and it was about the same. So we kind of did both just to check and make sure we were right, so that's where it was at.
Okay, thank you.
But your question was, how do we know we're good? That bottom graph, that shows we now have a balance at the end of each year. And the first one he showed us is we're on track to have a negative balance.
A large negative balance is what you're on track to have right now with the current policies.
Right.
Can I caveat your question, Stephen, to Jessica, like that we would do this rate increase and everything would be good for 10 years or for a long while?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. With what we know now, like if there's no new regulations or nutrient limits get implemented on the river, I mean, looking at what we've got in our plant, what we think we will have to update and then maintain, we think that this works.
And just remember, see how Councilmember Holman is saying, man, it's been 10 years since the last time we've had a wastewater rate increase. We'd be 8, 9 years down the road saying, man, it's been 8, 9 years since we've had a wastewater rate increase. It's a relatively very good picture.
Is there a way of being able to time rate increases at a lower rate if we took a water rate increase now and then went in 2 years and then went in 2 years and kind of timed the way that we ran rate increases so that it levels it out a little bit more?
The voters could approve a structure like that. Now, that's not what's proposed here.
Right. But is that a
But yes,
viable
you could put a proposal on the ballot to say 2% this year, 3% next year, 4%, 4%, you could do that, yes.
Thank you.
One more
Yes, sir.
follow-up. And this does not include any plans for the reuse or enhancements or things that we'd have to make if we go down that path.
Reuse really benefits water, and we haven't, to date, we've spent some wastewater money doing this research on reuse, but really, it should live in the water fund, and it hasn't. But moving forward, we need to start paying for the reuse for water because it benefits the water. Steve running the wastewater plant, it doesn't benefit him any, that fund, because they can just put it in the river right now.
Right.
But the water folks, that might be a good source of cheap water to put back in our lake and figure out a way to reutilize
wasn't
it, so
sure
they
if
need to
the-
pay for it.
If the plant had to have additional
Upgrade,
enhancements.
it does, but water.
Both of them having to have additional.
Water will pay for it. Water would
Water
probably.
will pay
in a-
for, okay.
I think in a perfect world, water needs to pay for any upgrades at the water plant, and they'll need to pay for this extra
Water will pay
modular
for, okay, I see.
at the WRF to take capture some of their water and use it for the lake.
Okay.
We do have in our 2060 water supply plan, we do have where we're going to do some irrigation with reuse water. And I think we still do have that funded out of the wastewater fund, but we would think that if we sold that water to someone, the revenues would come back to that fund as well.
And that's not what this
Okay.
model's set up on.
Thank you.
Ready to move on to water?
Yeah, so that's wastewater. That's a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we're gonna see.
Great questions.
Yes.
Just so everyone, I'm sorry, I have to drop off for another commitment, but by all means, Nathan, reach out to me if there's any further questions.
Thank you so much, Toby. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Toby.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Good night.
So Toby brought up a lot of good points from financial planning in general, and a lot of these items he brought up also apply to water utility. Unfortunately, we have a few more scenarios and things are a little more complex with water, but the same fundamental concept is they want to make sure we maintain the financial health of the utility by having revenue and fees pay for the annual expenditures. So here are some assumptions, like Toby mentioned, our operating at 8% of O&M, that's about 30 days reserve we want to have in the bank. We have a capital reserve of 1 year depreciation expense. The reason we use depreciation expense is not to be fancy, but it kind of recognizes when you think about accounting that assets depreciate over time, and that means that they get older, they become obsolescent, they become obsolete and whatnot. So we made the assumption with depreciation expense that, well, we want to keep 1 year of depreciation expense for the utility on hand because that's how much each asset deteriorates or becomes not useful each year. So depreciation expense is a common metric used for a capital reserve. And we have the same debt service coverage requirements required by the state revolving loan fund or SRF. Our capital funding, we have a couple scenarios to show you, and we only showed you one in wastewater, but we're going to show you about 4, or highlight 4 scenarios in water. And the goal is that we're going to try to cash finance. What kind of revenue adjustments would we require if we cash finance all non-growth projects and we bond finance all growth-related projects? And we'll talk about that when we get to those scenarios. The connection fees will help fund the growth-related projects. However, over a 10-year period, the amount of connection fee revenue you get from new development may not equal a particular growth-related project in any one year. So if you have a $150 million growth-related project, and over 10 years you only collect $1 million, the difference has got to come from somewhere. It's got to come from rates. But over time, as more connection fees come in the door, as more growth occurs, the fund will be rebalanced with that money coming in. So it's just something to keep in mind, that the timing of connection fees, the timing of a project don't always line up. And in that instance, that you might have to use some other source of revenue, reserves or rates. And right now, our scenarios, we're assuming with our growth-related projects that we're using a connection fee of about $1,500 per 3/4 inch water meter. And that's the lowest fee you have in the schedule for connection fees is $1,500 per new connection for a 3/4 inch meter.
Just a quick clarification on that, like our current, you guys did an interim increase, we did $1,250 and then we're going $1,500, but for all intents and purposes, we stayed with the $1,500 because that's where we'll be at when next fiscal year rolls around, essentially.
So we looked at 5 scenarios, and I say 4, but 5 extension of the 4th scenario. The first one is, what does a financial plan look like with no growth? That means that the revenue from rates is going to be the same every year in theory, as long as the usage patterns stay the same. There's no growth-related projects listed in the capital improvement program, and there's no connection fee revenue. The next one is purchase OKC water. This was one of the growth-related scenarios in connection fees we developed back this time last year. And what's interesting about this is that this is a growth-related scenario, meaning we do have growth-related projects, but it's somewhat minimized by purchasing OKC water, Oklahoma City wholesale water, instead of a capital project. It's an operating expense, so it's a little different. But either way, because that is a growth-related item, we are collecting connection fees. The next scenario is the 10-well scenario, and I don't know the exact official title for that. I can let Nathan chime in on that. That's also a growth-related project, and we will be bond financing it in our scenario here. $1,500 per 3/4 inch equivalent meter. And we also looked at 3180, it should be an 8 instead of 3,100, $30,180 per 3/4 connection fee. Just to show the slight differences in what would the revenue adjustments need to be. So those are our 5 scenarios. I'm going to show you a graphic similar to what Toby put up with our graph of the revenues and expenditures. And again, these are still under review, so we're going back to sharpen our pencils after this meeting, after discussions with Nathan, Anthony, and Chris. Here's our 10-year capital improvement program. We have $395 million, and there's a big expenditure in fiscal year 28. That's the Chromium project. I'm not sure the exact components of that, but it is a significant amount in the capital improvement program. The key thing here from a financial aspect is, well, how do we ensure this Chromium project, which is not a growth-related project, how do we finance this? Do we have do we have incremental increases up front in fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 27 and try to build up enough cash to pay for the Chromium project? Or do we just bond finance the whole thing? And in our examples, we're bond financing most of that project. The revenue adjustments would need to be pretty significant to get us $154 million, which is the cost of that project. But either way, this is a hurdle that we need to kind of overcome in our financial planning because it is a significant amount, whether you cash finance it or whether you bond finance it.
So that's a big number on the screen. So the chromium treatment facility, like groundwater treatment facility, is something that's kind of been on our radar for a long period of time. 2015 rate increase, we said we were going to buy the land for that. We have bought the land for that. When we bought the land, we looked at the site, made sure, one, it was going to meet the needs for us to blend the wells and do the immediate disinfection requirement that we needed to meet. But we also looked to make sure, are we going to have enough space on that site to do the chromium treatment? So something that we knew was coming, we just weren't sure when it was going to come. Now we're starting to see studies that are being completed by the EPA, looking at dose response, like how much chromium is bad, and try to figure, okay, how does that translate to water and how much water people drink? And then they're going to come out with a new MCL, we believe, that's going to say, okay, here's the level that you need to now treat your water to, and you're going to have to meet that within a certain period of time. So we've seen more signs of that now, so this is something kind of new on our radar here that we just kind of wanted to point out. We've been planning on capital program, but didn't have that in here really till recently. So,
And just for history, in 2001, this all happened with arsenic in water. And then by 2006, it became the law. And so we had to turn off 16 wells because we had arsenic in those. This one, we're at 100 for chromium right now, and we're seeing signs it's going to go 10 or less. So and it's going to affect all of our wells. It's going to affect Del City, Midwest City, Edmond. So Central Oklahoma is all going to have to deal with this. But that's what we're seeing. So it's getting closer to us. And usually they'll come out with the rule and give you about 5 years to implement. So that's why we're putting it out there.
Councilmember Hull?
And you mentioned this is in our strategic water supply plan to build a groundwater treatment plant. And you've mentioned too recently that just blending wells with our water treatment plant water is not enough anymore, correct? And we've got to treat it additionally than what we've been doing historically. So like this is required, and we've been planning for it for quite a while as well.
We worked with
How to pay
Corollo
for it, different story, but yeah.
on that pilot project, and we actually did it with biological removal. We had these little organisms that changed the chrome 6 into chrome 3, made it a precipitate, and then it came out as a solid, so we took it out of the water. So we showed there's technology that works. We'll just have to build it and make it on a big scale.
And all of our wells have complied with current regulations.
Yes, the limit is 100. It's always been safe until now, but we see them want to lower that.
Okay.
Councilmember?
Back on the previous slide with the augmentation, does that have to do with like the reclamation, or is that just purely just water to make it safe for us to drink?
That's the recommendation.
That's the
That's the
project.
reclamation.
Yeah, so the pilot project is looking at, we can augment the lake with a lot of different waters, but what we found in the water supply plan was it would probably be most affordable and the best against future droughts if you use your own wastewater. You're giving it to other people to use. Why don't you treat it and put it back in the lake? And so that project is what's setting up for this.
So that's where we did our current connection fee of the 1,500. So is that part of the augmentation, or that's separate?
so when we looked at the connection fees on the last study that we did in 2020,
Yeah.
early this year, we looked at, the three supply alternatives, and it was a little bit over 2,100 for both OKC and groundwater, and then it was 3,180 for the augmentation. And we our council decided to take the incremental step to go to 1,250 and then 1,500 next year.
But the full cost that we would actually need to do the program successfully would be the 3,100. Is that something that we as council could go back and vote on to have it increase to the 3,100? And does that increase go to just developers, or is that who all does that increase apply to?
Connection fees are a one-time fee, so it would go to that new home. When you build a new home and you connect, that's where it would go.
But we only cautioned, and we didn't jump all into that yet, because we're not quite there on Del City, Midwest City, saying that they'll allow us to put it back in the lake. So that plan is in our plan, but it's not in Midwest City's and Del City's plan. And we have to all be in agreement to go to DEQ to ask for this rule change to make it happen. But we're showing them right now what we're doing. We're letting them look at this. And our draft report comes out on Friday this week. And we're gonna share that, and then we're gonna go speak to their councils to see if they want to partner with us in this good plan, because we think it is a good way to augment the lake. But we still have to pass that hurdle before I think we should charge anybody like that's the direction we're going. The wells and then the buying more Oklahoma City, the 2,000 numbers, we could do those without anybody else's participation. It just wasn't the first one listed in our water plan, so we're trying to ding that bell in our water plan and go for that as best we can before we give up on that, you know.
Because I just want to make sure that we've got this out for the public, because I just recently spoke at an event, and it was cornbread and beans. And something that they brought up was this scenario right here, and they asked why they stated the reason that they felt that the recent vote for the water increase failed was because we're showing a need of the 3,100, but we only passed the 1,500, and they felt that everyone should pay their full share because we need this, and they don't see why the citizens should have to pay their full share if the developers aren't. But you're stating that right as of now, we really can't go for that. We really couldn't do a $3,100 increase because we don't
can.
have the buy-in of Midwest City and Dell City.
We just don't know if that'll be the final plan. So you'd be taking money for a plan you think we're gonna do, but we might not end up being able to do it. And so that's kind of the purpose of this cost of service. We did get a lot of that feedback that we're not hitting the full fees on the connection fees. We're getting ready to show what the full fees are for our citizens to all be paying on your bills. And I don't think we can all afford these numbers we're getting ready to see either. So we're all gonna not be able to, I think, charge each other the full the connection fee or the full rate fee. That's what we're gonna show you. And
So-
it's a big number.
With this, I'm just trying to understand. So with the 1,500, let's just take the augmentation out of it for a minute. Is 1,500, does that cover the full connection fee?
No.
So what do we need to cover the full connection fee?
For a Wells or Oklahoma City, 2,100 would be a full coverage.
And then, do you know what Oklahoma City pays or any surrounding cities pay?
My recollection on Oklahoma City is they were paying 1,000.
1,000. I
So,
think they're good, and they chose to keep it that low. They like that to incentivize development.
But they had a higher water rate than we do.
More people.
yes. We could,
And way more people.
I apologize, we should have added those back in. We had looked at those when we did the rate increase. Yeah, our connection fees are generally fairly high for the region, and our water rates and other utility rates are fairly
I remember
low.
the water rate were super low. So, are we currently, are we excess of capacity currently? Or
Not
how
yet,
much-
so we're getting close.
We're getting close. And so, is the cost of adding services increasing or adding capacity increasing for us? Like how everything is increasing, prices are increasing with building materials and things like that. I'm assuming that the
Yeah,
cost for.
everything's going up.
So whenever we're pushing this cost for connection fees, we're doing it though at an average cost, right? So we're not considering what the increase might be.
100%.
So
But-
how do we do that then so that it's fair, so we can account for inflation and things like that?
Right. Well, if you will, just let's watch this presentation
fair.
because it's going to say we all need to pay 30% more. And that's really what we should be paying. So are we going to all pay 30% more? These are big numbers. And so we're saying it to one group, but are we going to say it to all of us? And if we pay
If I
all,
may, I think it's really important to step back and understand that if you're looking at the connection fee, you should understand that the connection fee revenue is just one part of the revenue picture that is needed to pay for these programs and to operate the utility.
Right, and I
It's a
100%
relatively small
understand
part of the
that.
revenue picture.
I get that, but we have citizens in our community that just voted this down just a few months ago. And so I don't want to get into the same predicament if what we're hearing as feedback from our public is, hey, if we're going to be made to increase our fees, then we need to push the developers to pay their fair share as well. So that's all I'm
Yeah,
saying.
just hear what the consultants
Fair
say
enough.
about the the growth piece versus the current piece.
Okay,
And
And they did a scenario of no growth just to show, would we have to raise it, even if we don't grow anymore, and told everybody, no more connection fees. We can't allow any more houses. They have a number in here of what today's people would have to pay just to take care of our system.
okay.
That's
Great
what-
questions. Hopefully the next few slides will shed some.
One more question, Todd, sorry.
Just
Yeah.
to clarify too, that we have raised the connection fee 3 times and will be 4 times next year since the last water rate increase. So the last time we asked for a water rate increase, we have increased connection fees 4 times since then. And so I think that's just important to note. And we did it in a stepped, both times have done it in a, where it went up a little bit and then a little bit more the next year. So it wasn't all at once either. So just wanted to make sure we've been raising that, and it sounds like both are needed, is what I'm hearing.
Okay, Todd, thank you.
Thank you.
Oops. Okay, similar to what Toby had mentioned about the current state, we are deficient in a number of areas here. We're not meeting our revenue targets, our expenditure targets, our debt service coverage or reserves. And so we need to find a way to correct that while minimizing the impact to existing customers. So a similar graph here, build it up. We have the O&M, and this is the current state. We have the O&M, debt service, and rate funded CIP. You can see that it increases in some years and decreases in others, and that kind of makes it difficult to find the best blending of revenue adjustments. And our current revenues are here. So what this is saying is that when the bar is higher than the line, you are spending more than you're earning in a given year, or stated differently, you're drawing down reserves if you have it. So coming to this next slide here, you can see that by fiscal year 25, you've exhausted your reserves, and you are far below the target, which is that green line there, and you've got a very large negative balance. Of course, this may not really happen because you would stop doing capital projects, which would lead to other issues, but gives you a general sense that at the current rate, with the current rates, the revenue stream is insufficient to meet your annual expenditures. And this is just rate revenues. It doesn't include connection fees or anything like that, just regular operating revenue. So we looked at, like I said, 5 scenarios to figure out, well, what's going to be the best blend of revenue adjustments and bond issues and that sort of thing for the growth-related projects. So this is an example of one of the 5. They're all very similar in look and feel on this graph here. The percentages are slightly different for each one of them, and I'll explain why the difference is. But at the end of the day, we ended up with the appropriate funding of connection fee revenue, revenue adjustments. They all look about the same, so I spared you looking at each one of these individually. So it's somewhat of an example. So we've got our O&M, our debt service, our rate funded capital, and our operating revenues. The light blue line there shows our rate revenues, and you can see there's a bump in fiscal year 23, 24. Actually, the rate increase is in fiscal year 24, and then another revenue adjustment in fiscal year 27. What's interesting about this is that in all 5 of our scenarios, fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 27 were the pinch points, that there was something happening in those years that required a rate increase. In fiscal year 24, it was we needed a revenue adjustment just to meet our target reserves. And then as the years went on, fiscal year 27, there was another financial item that happened that requires to have a revenue adjustment. So it applied to all the scenarios, just in different magnitudes. And so with the appropriate revenue adjustments, we are meeting our target reserves. The blue bar, or the green bar there is the ending balance, and the lighter green line there is our target reserves. You can see that in fiscal year 27, we kind of draw it down a little bit, then we build them back up, and that's because in that year, capital, we have a lower capital project amount in that given year. So this is what the target state would look like for all of the scenarios. We're just showing the augmentation scenario 4 just as an example of what this might look like. And there's the target reserve. Oh, and this one in this example is 28%, in fiscal year '24 and another 45% in fiscal year '27. And I'll get to why that is here in just a moment. Okay, so we've got the table here with a lot of information on that. We have on the left-hand side, we have the 5 scenarios, the no road, OKC, 10 wells, augmentation with the 31 AE connection fee. And we have the fiscal year adjustments in '24 and '27. And then the fourth column is the total connection fee revenue. And the last column here is the total rate revenues. That's what that says there. Yes. So looking at scenario 1, no growth at all, we have 28.5% required in fiscal year '27 and '24. There's no connection fee revenue, and your rate revenues total $370 million. Now, contrasting that with OKC, we need 32.5% in fiscal year '24 and a fiscal year '27. And we're getting $8.5 million in connection fees, and our rate revenue is a total of 392. So the question is, well, wait a minute. In the OKC option, we're collecting connection fee revenues. Why are the rate increases higher in fiscal year '24 and '27? Well, the primary reason is that although there's no real other capital projects, purchasing of the OKC water gets up to $4 or $5 million per year, and that begins in fiscal year '26, I believe. So that accumulates pretty quickly. So the connection fee revenue is certainly helping with maintaining a fund balance there, but you still need a buildup of a revenue adjustment to help meet that connection fee, to meet that OKC cost over the study period.
I just want to throw this out there really quick, that OKC, I just read an article on this. They're also running out of water and not sure where they're going to be in like a 10 to 20 year scenario. And so that's why they increased their fees for sending water out, is what I've heard.
No, they built a huge supply to
what I
supply
read.
central Oklahoma. Tell them about McGee Creek.
Well, yeah,
Sardis Lake.
yeah, so they have a program where they're building a 72-inch pipeline from Matoka to Draper. That's their first phase, and then the next phase after that they have to have done by 2035 will be building over to the Kiamichi River. And
So they're filling up Draper again?
yes,
Huh. Interesting. What I read was that they were running low and that's why they were increasing as well. So good to know.
They're just their plan is they have Canton Lake, Hefner, Draper, they have Overholser too, have Atoka, McGee Creek, and they're using all those. They bring those southeast ones out and put in Draper and use out of that. They bring the northwest over to Hefner and use out of that and clean, do their treatment. And then they're gonna add the McGee Creek, that, what you say, the Kiamichi River, and then drop Sardis. They're gonna drop it down the Kiamichi River down to about McGee Creek, or there's actually Hugo or somewhere, and pump that in. But it's all about the conveyance, but they're planning, they would like to serve all of central Oklahoma. That's their plan, to get enough water for all of central Oklahoma, us included.
That's what I'm calling.
Yeah, I'll just say that's why we went with the reuse plan as our number one preferred option, because of uncertainty about Oklahoma City, or being a full customer of theirs, what the costs would be long term, since their city council would be setting the rates that we'd be paying for that. And then if something happened in Oklahoma City with their water resources, they would understandably supply their residents before us, right? If it came down to it. So didn't feel like it was a good idea to be attached fully to Oklahoma City, using their help in the interim and when we can't supply enough, but long term trying to maintain our water independence with Lake Thunderbird
But
as much as possible.
I say on that though, I think they see everyone as a customer, so they want to serve all their customers equally. They don't have favorites. It'd be like us and OU, me saying I'm only going to serve Norman first and I'll cut OU off first. I wouldn't do that. They're not going to do that either. They would want to serve, if they're broken, they're going to try to hurry up, get back in business, because they love peddling water, because that's the money that comes in to pay their loans, that all the things that they've done.
But if we were running out of water, the neighborhoods of Norman would have priority over that water over OU watering the, or doing whatever they're doing, I would say. Now you could say
you'd tell
the
everybody to
residents.
quit using the grass, probably, but
Sure.
I don't think you'd pick a neighborhood over another. And I think on them, what we're thinking of doing is maybe having them come talk to council and present, just so you know, because what we're seeing is having diversified portfolio is awesome for us.
Yes.
We can get a little bit from Oklahoma City, so when they had troubles, then I went well in my plant. When my wells cause me trouble, then I go plant in Oklahoma City. When my plant goes down, I go wells in Oklahoma City. So having the three in our portfolio, we want to keep that now. And then the water plan, we said maybe get rid of Oklahoma City, but we've seen so much value when we had that big deep freeze. There was a time actually they broke and they could have used some of our water, but then we broke and we were using their water.
Right.
And they saved us. So we're like, ooh, that's powerful.
Yeah,
Having all
I wouldn't
this-
want to get rid of the connection to
Yeah.
them. Just don't want to be reliant.
Not
on them.
only them, we
Yeah.
want to always keep, I always want to keep our wells and always
Yes.
keep our lake and our water plant. But I'm thinking they need to have a play in there too, or we should look at them as a good source of water, as a,
Sure.
one of our legs. So,
Well, it can also be a thing when we talk about growth. If we do that and need more capacity, that's a way to do it.
yes, and it's the easiest way. We just turn a little dial.
Right.
Right now, we're buying 1 million gallons a day. We can take 6.5 million gallons a day from them. So we have 5.5, we could just go turn the dial whenever you guys wanted to go up. But once you turn it, you can't go back down. You become a permanent. And whereas the wells, we have to go drill one more well. That does, I forgot how many folks, but that's 300,000 gallons a day. We have to kind of get in those increments. In the lake, we have to build the whole system to get our first gallon out of there. It's going to be an expensive one probably, because you got to put a lot of cash up to get in the game before you get your first gallon.
Right.
You know.
Very good.
Okay. Moving on to alternative three, I'll be brief here. When we look at alternative three, again, let's compare it to no growth. So the no growth has no growth related projects in it and just no growth period, so there's no connection fee revenue, as you can see. The 10 wells, we do have connection fee revenue of $8.5 million coming in. The growth related projects in this example or in scenario 3 are bond financed, meaning we're not paying for the entire capital project in 1 year. Rather, we know that by bond financing, we'll have an annual payment, debt service payment, and we'll also have an annual stream of connection fee revenues, in theory, assuming growth were to be constant. And by doing that, you can have your connection fee revenue kind of match up with your annual debt service. So by being able to do that, rather than trying to cash finance any of the growth-related projects, you're able to keep your revenue adjustments lower, because connection fees can really help pay against the annual debt service rather than trying to generate a huge amount of cash and pay for the entire project out of rate revenues, because you probably won't have enough connection fee revenue to do that. So as a result, the increase is 29% in fiscal year 24 and 28% in fiscal year 27. A slightly less revenue required, rate revenue required than in no growth. And the rest here, similar story on 4 and 5. You can see that 28% and in fiscal year 24 for scenario 4 and 25% for scenario 5. But there's a big jump in fiscal year 27. And that's just because of the timing of the project. And what we had done is fiscal year 27 or 24, saying, well, we want to raise our revenues just enough to get us to the pinch point in fiscal year 27. Now, we could have said, well, let's just do one increase in fiscal year 24 to cover it all and go for a 60% revenue adjustment. It probably would have worked as well. But by the end of the study period, because of the cumulative effect of that rate increase each year, you'd have an enormous fund balance, and it would kind of throw everything out of whack, if you will.
Okay.
So that's what we focused on. Go ahead.
Yeah, but we have a question on this side.
Sure.
Altogether, I don't know where we're at with like these smart meters. Where are we at on that?
We have done the RFP, we've selected a vendor, our consultant is currently working on contract with them.
Okay, and with those, is anything calculated in here with those? Because we're guessing that we're gonna track more revenue and probably end up saving some. So what if that ends up being millions of dollars every year? Does that fix a lot of problems?
They didn't see that it was gonna be $1 million a year. They were seeing that we're gonna pay it back in like 15 years.
Cover our loan payment.
Yes. So,
It's kind of a
And
net
it's-
neutral thing.
and it's a 20-year design life, so.
But I mean, but what if it comes in? You're like, holy moly, we're capturing $2.5 million more a year on the exact same water.
Then that would be great, and then the 27 increase would not have to be
Instead
as
of
much.
45 would go less. I mean,
So I mean, that's something we don't have any clue yet until it's implemented.
right.
Well, we have a clue of what water we're pushing out from the water plant. We just know that we're not capturing it all on the back end, so we at least know what we're
Yeah.
losing.
We do annual water audits, so we have an idea of that, and then we've got what our consultant tells us what we should expect from this, that this is a project that they do in other locations, so.
Yeah, but I mean, like if it detects the leaks and all that kind of stuff, and we're able to get a leak.
We know the assumptions that we made to cover the debt service on the $15 million debt that we had
Okay.
to pay for the meters. So just, it's.
We have a pretty good idea it's not gonna save us or generate millions of dollars, so.
And you want to point out too, this is where the Councilmember Studley, if you went to the 3180, if we did get the full out of connection fees, you can see the difference. Hope you state this here.
So you're-
Item 4 is without it, that's at the 2,500, right?
That's a 15.
Yeah.
1,500. So that's 1,500 connection fees, and there's your percent increases that we all need to kick up. Or if we do say, okay, let's go get the full builder's fees, 3,180 out of the builders. We still need, okay, now we still got that saved us 3% on this first one, 25%, and the second one we're still at 45%. So again, we gotta focus on the rate increase. The rate increase generates more money. The connection fees is kind of, they're important, but they're a small piece of our revenue. They're a very small piece. We only build 600 homes a year. So 600 times the 3,180, that's what money gets generated.
Yeah.
But our rates, this is big money. This is what it's gonna take to really repair pipes, fix the plants. And so we gotta focus on that on this next time. I gotta do better explaining that.
No,
didn't do good
I
enough.
get it, but I'm just, again, what feedback is from people that I talk to
I heard it
is
too.
that.
You're right,
So-
you're right.
And that is why we did that scenario 1 there. So scenario 1 is we didn't build any homes, there was now a connection fee collected again, our ratepayer base didn't grow, we'd still need 28.5%. I mean, we still need a sizable rate increase just for existing infrastructure.
And again, as your treasurer and you as a trustee, you have to explain that. That is a false equivalency that people are trying to make. The revenue from the connection fee, wherever you said it, does not drive the revenue picture of the water utility. The revenue picture of the water utility is driven by rates.
I understand that. I think the voters understand that too, but I think they want to make sure that everyone's paying their fair share, and that's what I'm hearing.
They're paying it on both ends. They're paying it when they buy the house, and then they're paying it when they run the water.
And if we ran we're building 2,400 houses or 4,800 houses, that might be a different picture, not substantially. It's just it's a flat fee per.
I get it. I get it. It's perception.
No, you're right. And I got a lot of feedback that same. And so I felt like I didn't explain it well enough. And so I'm going to try better this time to really show what those numbers are.
Yes, sir.
I would just say, just some rough math, if we were to raise our water rate every year like other cities apparently do, this rate would have been a 3.5% increase per year instead of
Yes.
28% at once.
Yes.
That's the peril we find ourselves in waiting all these years, is that instead of a little bitty piece every year, we have to come and say, hey, we haven't asked you to do this in a while, we need 30% or 50%. And then people look at their whole city bill and say, you're gonna double my whole city bill? And it's like, no, just the water line, but it makes it harder to explain. And a former counselor always said, if you're explaining, you're losing.
Well, but it's
Oklahoma
like
City.
dust on a cabinet. You dust every week, it's hardly any problem. You dust every year, it's a problem.
Oklahoma City raises theirs about 4 to 5% a year,
Every year.
pretty much, just to keep up with it.
Yes, ma'am.
Have we tried in the past, since this is a unique problem for Norman? Has the city tried in the past to do annual voter approved rate increases? Have we ever tried that? Or have we just been too scared as a city to go ask for it?
We come to ask when we could put it on the calendar, and there's just so many needs. We gotta do a stormwater vote, we need a street bond vote, and then we feel like we're wearing out the citizens and the customers that, I just gave you money for that, and I would give you money for this.
But
and
is
that."
this more wearing? Asking
Yeah,
for
it is.
30%?
That's a good question.
I would like that, but that's why it didn't happen in the past.
Yeah, we did try an initiative 2010.
We tried a 3-year
Where
step.
it would be the voters approving several years in a row of smaller increases in one ballot question, and it failed.
Right.
And so we just have not ever gotten back to that.
And then, not the same thing, but obviously the charter amendment didn't go through well.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Todd.
Okay, great. I do want to point out one thing Chris was mentioning about about scenario five. If you look at column 4, which says total connection fee revenue, we get 8.5 million from scenario 4 and 17.3 million from scenario 5. The difference is about $10 million. And if you look at the total rate revenue difference, it's about $10 million. So because we're using $1,500 and not $3,180, there's $10 million over the study period that needs to come from ratepayers. And eventually that money will get paid back as you collect connection fee revenue in the future. But not all of it, because we know that you're not gonna have all the people tie into the system at once. And that's the problem that's a challenge with connection fees. You have to build the capacity for the future, but then you have to collect it over a number of years, and this is a perfect example of that. So just wanted to point that out, and that's kind of a relationship connection fees have with rate revenues. You know, if you have a growth-related project and there's not enough connection fee revenue to pay for it, you gotta get it from somewhere, and it's gonna be rates, with the hopes that future growth will end up kind of paying back that bank account. So that's the financial plan portion of this. We saw some other components here. I'll go over these briefly, but like I said, there are 3 components to our study of the financial plan, which we're still kind of obviously fine-tuning, and after this meeting, we'll probably have a few discussions on how to dial all those scenarios in. But after the financial plan portion of it, we need to look at, well, we figure out how much revenue we need, who's going to pay? What group of customers are going to pay, residential or commercial? Who owes how much? So what we try to do, and this gets into a little bit of the weeds here, but we have an annual revenue requirement, or if you, in simple terms, it's your budget. You have your annual capital requirement, your annual O&M requirement, your transfers, and how much you're contributing to reserves, and that's an amount of money. And we have to find a way, how do we allocate that and distribute that to the various customer classes? Do we throw spaghetti on the wall and just see what sticks? Or do we go through a thoughtful process to figure out which one of these groups should be paying how much? And that's exactly what cost of service is. So we go through a very regimented process here. We look at all your expenses. We figure out what are these expenses doing, what's driving these expenses. Are there certain expenses that are related to treatment and pumping, and how do the customers use those facilities, and how can we equate that to the types of demands these customers place on the system. So we go through this whole cost allocation process, and that's what that big circle is. You can see all the different components of the water system, very similar for the wastewater system as well, similar process. And we actually allocate those costs to the customer classes. So if our revenue requirement was $1 million for the year, we might go through this analysis and find out, well, residential should be paying $800,000 of that, commercial should be paying $100,000, and irrigation should be paying the other $100,000. That's great. Now we have to turn that into a rate and figure out, well, how are we going to get it from the customers? What's the mechanism? Is it a service charge and a volume charge? Is it just a volume charge and that sort of thing? So this is the cost service analysis. This is kind of the back office type thing. When we come back to you, we're going to show you what the bubbles on the right are in terms of cost. What should the residential, commercial, and irrigation classes be paying in aggregate? From that, we move on to rate design. We know how much each customer class should be paying in total. How are we going to recover that? What's the mechanism to recover? So again, right now you have a 2-component or 3-component rate structure. You have a service charge and then the capital improvement charge, which are both fixed. Then you have a volumetric charge, which is tiered for residential. and tier for commercial. But rather than looking at rate structure alternatives and saying, well, should we have a 3-tiered structure? Should we have this type of base fee structure? We're going to work with staff and find out what are the important objectives that need to be baked into the structure. One of them might be conservation. That's why you have a tier structure today. So we want to make sure the wise use of water and conservation is an objective we have in our rate structure. We also want to be able to get citizen vote approval, so it probably needs to be easy to understand and meets their expectations of what they should be paying for. We want to make sure that we're being equitable between the different customer classes, that commercial is not subsidizing residential. So those are all objectives, and from those objectives, we can then design a rate structure. So we're starting from the bottom up, rather than looking at a bunch of different rate structures and trying to figure out which one fits. We're kind of going from the bottom up there, and it makes things a lot easier to understand and easier to explain to the customers of what we're trying to do with the rate structure. So the cost of service and rate design, those are the second and third process in this study that once we kind of get the financial plan dialed in, we'll come back to you with the cost service component and we'll walk through that as well as the rate design and what we're suggesting for some rate design. There might not be any changes at all. We might retain everything. There might be some slight adjustments you might want to make, and we'll certainly bring those alternatives to you and let you know, here's the benefits, here are the drawbacks to that, and here's the impact to the customer on those different alternatives. So, still have a ways to go, and those are going to be some interesting discussions with everyone, and we hope to be finishing that up in the next few months. Here's our schedule going forward. This was preliminary. I put this together. It might need to change a little bit after today. But between January and February, we're really going to be completing the cost of service and rate design. January, we're leading up to really finalizing the financial plans. And we got a lot of great feedback here tonight. And in February, we'll be evaluating the rate design alternatives, both with staff and maybe with council as well. And then in February, we're hopefully having, later February, we'll be having a final meeting with council to show all of our findings, both the financial plan and cost of service and the rate design. So we still have a way to go. We're making progress here. We're getting over some hurdles with the financial plan, and we plan to come back to you a couple more times as we work through the rest of the study. So Nathan, I'll turn it back to you. That's it for me on my end.
Okay. I think that's all we have on our side. Just kind of want to present you the update of the work that we've done so far. See if there's any additional input that you guys have. Didn't want to give you a rate shock right before Christmas, but the numbers are kind of what the numbers are. We run our capital program fairly lean. It's kind of like we budget what we need to do, and then we kind of get close to it, and then are we going to be in the red or are we going to be in the black, and but we have to shift out, and we just prioritize. So, but happy to get input on this. Go ahead.
Can you tell me again, you had mentioned that you guys are getting a report together now to present to Midwest City and Dell City. When are you guys actually going to present that?
I don't know. The draft comes Friday, so we'll review it, look for typos and see what it says. And then Garver, Cole Niblett is the project engineer I'm working with. We just said he and I will probably go over. Paul Streets is the public works director in Midwest City. And we thought it'd be a good idea for us to go over and present to their council and kind of explain to them what we're talking. And then Dell City also go over and explain to them what we're thinking.
Because I know I took a tour with you before I actually sat in this seat, and that was May of 2021. And I know then you were saying that it's kind of the same song and dance. You know, we're having the same conversations. They're thinking about it. They're kind of on board. So where's the stall with this? What's the...
I mean, you know, the ugly part is they just think that we're putting our sewer water in their good clean lake too, and it's not. No, we're cleaning the water. We want to clean it very nice, high quality, and put that back to augment the lake. The thing that's come up recently is the drought forecasts, and so we didn't really get into these details, and I don't want to go into all the details, but the lake really, if a drought comes like the 50s drought, it's not gonna give us 21,600 acre feet. And we're all using, the three cities together are using 17,000 acre feet right now per year. And the yield that they just showed us, it's only gonna give us 12,700 acre feet.
Wow.
We're using 17,000, it's only gonna give us 12,700 if we have a drought like the 1950s. Okay, so that's all ifs. But that's what we're supposed to do, is plan for the worst, hope for the
Right.
best, right? And firm yields are what is used across the state. And so that's why we're thinking we really need to have a way to augment that lake. Otherwise, we're all gonna be tight on water.
Has anyone from their council or anything come out to see the reclamation?
Yeah. So I had
pilot?
the oversight committee.
Uh-huh.
I had 3 Midwest City folks, 2 Dell cities, and 3 Normans. And they all have been involved, and we've been presenting to them, maybe not enough, but we email them, we're getting, we got all their final feedback, and we're putting that in the report, some of the thoughts and ideas of what they thought we ought to do to get people to quit thinking toilet to tap. That's kind of a bad way to say it.
Right.
And seeing it as a beneficial water source, that might be the cheapest way to augment. But even if we don't, another thing that's going to be on council on January 10th is the PLOT. It's a way when to put the water back into the lake so you don't waste it. And it's really geared for this reuse. We got a grant for it from VOR to look into this research. It's a model. But we can augment it with whatever water. I mean, this is going to give us the tools to know when. Looks like it would be the cheapest at this time, so that's what the report will tell.
Would then be able to assist with
Okay, so you're getting deep. Okay. Protect us. If I clean it all up and spend $100 million, it's not my water anymore. Now, so sure I get that water out of there. So we're also working. The water board's doing a water board to put those water in a lake. You should be able to be the first Lake Thunder day. The 600 Norman has a ticket. That next piece of water, if there's a queued up to be, but more unraveling.
On them for
Okay.
10 years, I would say. They were complete. They've strategic plan. Thank you.
Is it possible to our city leaders first and all of us and have that or educated or that made me think of this whenever you were screaming for the water that we're to with the water that we're pulling.
Yeah, that's called direct. State doesn't have exact. It'll be on a case-by-case basis. Strict oversight will be so then before
we've got a few different options. Okay, thank you.
You got some other cities.
Yes. Yes.
I was curious about how many flip through it real quick. I did back online. In wells have been identified according to this.
The plan said just go with these 9 that we just drilled. I have a little just to make it good. You have a little extra. That was referring to. There were some wells along Highway 7. If you could use those and gain some additional water, I think that's what it's referring to.
In several different versions of what was it about 28? 28. Was that kind of about the same time? In that chromium.
Like when we show it as when we're going to need that expenditure. I mean, that's breaking ground. If they're going to make it be 5 years, it might be a year or two.
Regulations.
So that's something we are doing a bond for? Or
We would have
paying
to bond
for
that,
this?
absolutely.
Pardon me, I do. Numbers wise?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I have to leave it. I just got somewhere I gotta be.
Councilmember Holman.
Yeah. Leading up to this, Midwest City and Dell City haven't really experienced the population growth that we have and haven't needed additional water in the way that Norman has. And for quite a while, we were using more than our allocation of the lake, more than we were supposed to be using. And Midwest City and Dell City never really made a stink of it because no big deal, they didn't need it. Well, as they did start needing more of it, they did start to say, well, it's not fair that Norman is using more than they're supposed to be using. And thankfully, we've gotten a lot better. We've gotten a lot better, and we've with conservation efforts and things, odd even watering year round, all those types of ways, we've gotten better. But they just, I think some of the issues with reuse is they haven't needed additional water resources like we do, and it seems strange that you're going to put water that goes to the wastewater plant back in, and so that's been some of their apprehension, I think.
Absolutely.
But they have over the last 10 years become more warm to the idea, understanding drought issues, and that this would be a way to refill the lake when it is in trouble, and we could go with the direct reuse. But I think ideally we like the natural filter process of piping it to the stream and then letting it naturally flow through to the lake, blend in with the lake, and then pull it back out and treat it again. So that natural treatment element was kind of a big piece that was preferable over trying to directly pipe it to. But that is an option with a cost, of course, but if it comes down to it, that's something we could do if nobody else wants to play with us.
That's what we went and toured the wetlands, the little wetlands project OU's researching. So we're looking at that. We think that's a really ideal situation. You treat it, then you put it through a natural buffer of a wetlands. It further treats it. It's I'm going to put UV on it in a container, and then the sun will hit it with more UV and through a wetlands, and time and microbial maybe break it down further. So that's what we're hoping, and so. Other people think it's really got validity too. OU's doing research on it. The Bureau of Reclamation is spending $800,000 of their own group's money. They just asked if they could come play in our sandbox and do studies for us to see if wetlands could be used in our area, because they own our lake, Bureau of Reclamation, or they built it. And so they're investing money to see research in this because they really think it has merit, and they love the idea that we're going to recycle water for the state. We just got an award at the Governor's Water Conference for pushing, because the governor's initiative right now is to reuse water and try to not use any more fresh water than we were using in 2010. Right. And the only way to do that is find ways to reuse. And so Norman got an award for doing this research pilot and this wetlands work. I mean, people recognize that and think we're leaders in this and might be bringing something to the inland states to all benefit from, because others in the coast, they have oceans next to them, so they use reverse osmosis, they have a salty brine something, and they can let that go in the ocean. We don't. If we have a salty something, the only way we can do is underground injection in an oil gas well, and that causes earthquakes, so we don't want to be in that right now. So we're looking at other ways. That's why we were going with this ozone biofiltration, UV, hydrogen peroxide,
Yeah.
other methods. But we got very clean results.
And my last question is, so the rate increase for water utility that's being proposed in June is not geared towards expansion. It's geared towards covering existing operating and maintenance costs of our current users and current system.
Yes.
And then another potential rate increase in a few years could be for the expansion, reuse, or the or the groundwater treatment plant, maybe both, probably both.
But each time you do that, you're rolling the dice, that the voters will say yes.
Right. Yeah.
And so,
What we're having, Garver's going to have in this report is how much to treat 5 million gallons, 10 million gallons, or 15 million gallons to be able to put in that lake. The real trick is, when we started this study, we thought the lake's firm yield was 15,600 acre feet. And so the model showed if we could get 4.5 million, 5 million, what this pilot is really geared to do, that would get that 15,600 acre feet back to the 21,600 acre feet for the lake. That's what drove us to that number.
Now it's 12.
But now it's 12.7. It's like, oh no.
We
So
gotta
now
find
we
three
need more. And then we were planning on getting even more for the growth. So we'll have extra water to sell new homes. So we gotta do some calculations when we get these numbers back. The BOR is doing that firm yield study. They're doing a model. They're working on some things as well. So all this is kind of coming together, but just from a bunch of different directions.
But you're not asking ratepayers to increase their rates to pay for expansion right now.
Not for extra water,
Right.
no.
Okay.
Right now it's to take care of what we have.
Okay.
Chris, would you define the word for a meal, please?
Which one?
For a meal?
Vermeil.
Firm yield. Oh,
Firm yield.
yeah, that's.
Okay, I was getting one
Firm,
word.
I'm sorry. Firm yield.
Firm yield.
What they did is just looked at the records from 1895 to current and looked at those past droughts, and they modeled the lake. If everyone's taking everything, your full amount out, and evaporation is evaporating all it can, and you are getting some rain recharge of what's historical, how much can you take out and it'll still be water in the lake? And so the 1950s drought was a really dry one, in the 30s too, the Dust Bowl drought. But the 50s is the one that makes Lake Thunderbird go to zero. We wouldn't have enough water. And all that says is evaporation, the rain, that all happened in that year. The 3 cities could only take out 12,700 acre feet.
Gotcha.
And that's you would barely get by in that 1950s drought if it's that same one.
And are there ways that we could also discourage, or I guess discourage is a good word, water use in that by price structuring the amount of water that we use? Those people that want solid green lawns and all the rest of this kind of stuff and want to water every other day, we can price them to where that's just more expensive compared to somebody who's more moderate.
Yeah, and
That's
we
kind of the concept of
we
the
have
tiered
that.
structure now.
Yeah. We're pretty.
With the summer surcharge and everything, that's the concept that we have already.
Yes.
But there are a small number of users that use a large percent
Right.
of the
Right.
total. And that is one thing that comes up sometimes that the public kind of is like, I only use this much and this person is using.
But yeah, but it just, if you're like me, it's crazy to sit down and fertilize and water grass and then mow it twice a week or whatever, and then throw the grass away and then water and, keep on going
Yeah.
back on that cycle. It just needed, not
And
needed.
this cost of service, that's what he's doing, is he's gonna analyze, residential customers are actually they're tougher to serve
Yeah,
because they don't use very much in the winter, but they use a whole bunch in the summer.
yeah.
And so you gotta make your loan payments on the equipment you need to serve that maximum in the summer. But then they don't give you enough, they don't use enough in the winter to pay those loan payments, Whereas a commercial, OU uses about almost 1 million gallons a day, every day of the year.
Right.
So I know exactly what I need. They only have 1 meter. A neighborhood has all these meters, all these accounts to deal with. OU's a few meters, 1 account, 1 big amount of usage, and they just use that same amount over and over. So they're kind of an easier customer, even though they're bigger.
The biggest.
Yeah. So that's what this cost of service does, is goes and looks at the commercials, the industrial, the residential, And it's gonna try to define what you should really be charging them based on how much work it takes to serve them.
Total cost?
Hopefully this is an easy yes or no question. Since you brought up OU, does Tinker utilize the water or do they have their own water thing?
Yeah, they're on their own.
Okay. Okay, that's all I got.
All right. Any more questions?
Thank you for talking water. I mean, we love this stuff. I know it's boring really, but
That's
it's important. It really is important.
Water is life, so this
Yes.
is important to me.
And it's also gold, so. Anyway, we're adjourned. Merry Christmas. Happy
Not so much.
Thanks, Todd.